Hey, welcome into the Big Ten Huddle. I'm your host, JR, and we are here to talk about all the things that went on in the Big Ten this weekend. We had 6 games, and 6 exciting games, right? Most of these games were pretty close, except for one game, and we'll make sure we talk about that. But most of these games are really exciting, games that had some excitement factor all throughout, and it was really, really fun to watch them, and we want to talk about them with you today. We are joined by Russ from the Boiler Express podcast and Alec from the What's Choppin podcast. I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves and tell you where they can find them. Russ, tell them about yourself.
Yeah, so we are Boiler Express podcast. We are a Purdue-based basketball and football podcast. We do talk about a little bit other sports and other things going on in the country, but there's 5 of us over there. We have a lot of fun with it. You can find us at Boiler_Express. We're on X or Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, everywhere you find podcasts, Apple Podcasts, all that good stuff. So come check it out.
All right. Thanks, Russ. Alec, you want to tell people where they can find you?
Sure. So I am the one-man wrecking crew known as the What's Choppin' podcast, all about Rutgers football. You can find us on social media at What's Choppin' Pod, and then also at the What's Choppin' podcast at all podcasting platforms. Be sure to listen in. We got took a little bit of a I don't want to say a break, but got a little bit behind on stuff. But now the conference play is really ramping up. Going to get back into it. Got a lot of good guests, of course, from our network that we have here for the rest of the Big Ten schedule, so be sure to check it out.
For sure. And we have a ton of Rutgers fans that chime in here. I think I made a tweet one time about how their offensive line was rather good, and boom, Rutgers fans love to follow. So I think they're listening in. Rutgers fans, if you want to Rutgers podcast to go follow, Alec definitely has you covered there. Okay, let's get into the games this week. Our first game that we'll get into, Maryland at Ohio State. It was 37-17. The final score didn't really indicate how close this game was throughout, right? It was 10 to 10 at halftime. Ohio State was kind of struggling there in the very first quarter. I think they had something like 28 yards, which is really not what you would come to expect from a Ryan Day team. And ultimately, they just didn't look like the better team for the first half. Maryland looked like their team. They were playing much better. Alec, what were some of your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I mean, you said it yourself. It was much closer than the final score indicated. There was just a couple things that went wrong from Maryland. The pick six from Talia Tagovailoa towards the end of that first half. And then the really big blunder at the end of the half was that, I guess, couldn't get the spike down or something, like they just couldn't get the snap off at the end of the first half, and they were in the red zone. So that was a huge missed opportunity. And at the end of the day, I mean, Ohio State is just a more talented team at this point. Kyle McCord really showed up in the second half, really helped lead that team to victory, even when the run game wasn't as efficient. So I thought he did a great job in stepping up. But yeah, I mean, I'm still impressed with Maryland, even if they lost. I did say on Twitter that I would put them at number 1 if they won, thanks to the Turtleheads podcast, also part of the Big Bench Network. So they didn't, so I didn't have to do that. But still, I'm very impressed by them. But Ohio State, they need to get going a little bit sooner than they have in some of these games. And I think they have the talent and the coaching to do so. But I'm very impressed by Maryland, even though they lost by 20. And Ohio State just got to, get going a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. Russ, what were your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, could Travion Henderson take another week off? Because that would be swell. The OSU rushing game definitely looked a little rough without him. And McCord definitely did not look like a world beater by any means. But OSU still pulled away in the second half. It seems like they do that with some of the lesser opponents. When you have those poor man Duke opponents in your conference, you just got to take care of them in the second half. They still look like one of the clear 3 teams, I think, at the top of the conference. And, they'll get to prove it or not against Penn State, especially this week, or not this week, next week, in Michigan. They'll have to put their money where their mouth is. But, yeah, like Alex said, they can't start slow like they did against Indiana, like they did against Maryland, against those teams, because they'll make them pay. So, but, they definitely look like a still a top 3 team in the conference, for sure.
Yeah, I think my thing with Ohio State is that the run blocking just isn't there. I think Travion Henderson has a lot of speed to get to the outside, and I know Ohio State fans, me being one of them, are often very critical of Travion Henderson bouncing it too often. But this game, I saw Chip Trainum try to just, get right through the middle, find a hole, and just barrel through it, which, is fine in most circumstances. You want to see somebody just get the yards that are there. But he just doesn't have Travion Henderson's speed to be able to get to the outside, bounce it, and make those things happen when the run blocking isn't there, which credit to Maryland. Maryland, they did a good job. I don't think it was all Ohio State not doing a good job. I think Maryland did a good job on defense. They were able to stop the run better than I think they were most other times in other games, which varying to level of competition, right? So I was impressed by them in that front. But really, it just came down to Ohio State secondary. Ohio State secondary took on TT and made sure that he wasn't going to be the factor that beat him in this game. TT's one of the best quarterbacks in this conference. He's either the best or the second best. I don't know. It's really hard to tell when you don't see J.J. McCarthy playing anybody yet. I do think he's probably the best, but I think we just need to see him play somebody first. But to see the Ohio State secondary show up against them, it was encouraging, and for an Ohio State fan, it was encouraging. And I think Ohio State, it's going to be an uphill climb to try and beat Penn State and Michigan this year, just because those teams are very good. But I mean, you guys tell me, Alec, am I being too critical saying that Ohio State probably not going to be able to beat Michigan or Penn State this year, and they're kind of just a third man out? Or what are your thoughts on that?
It's tough because really all three of them haven't played too tough of a schedule. Michigan really hasn't played anybody, like you said. I mean, Ohio State, they beat Notre Dame, but of course that can be attributed to some real blunders by Notre Dame, and then they ended up losing to Louisville last night too. So it's kind of tough to say because none of the teams have. Penn State's looked really dominant at times. I'll give them that, but Ohio State and Michigan haven't looked too dominant. They looked really good against Minnesota last night, and we'll talk about that in a bit, I'm sure. But I think it's a little bit too soon. It feels weird to say it's a little bit too soon to say 6 weeks into the season. But I guess we'll see more a little bit when they really start to get into the season when they face each other, obviously.
For sure. Russ, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so, we talked a little bit before we came on that there's critical fans in every fan base, and there are things that are true that would make you worry as an Ohio State fan that you can't compete with Michigan or Penn State this year. But, if I was an Ohio State fan, worry about that when that day comes, because you'll have that time when you're on the field, and all you got to do is be better for that 60 minutes. Doesn't matter what's happened before that. And so I think you guys still have a chance. But, yeah, looking at the evidence that's before you, I can understand the thought process that you might be a step behind so far. But, it's one Saturday. You got to be better for one Saturday, and that's all that matters. So,
for sure. And I do want to make sure we give some love to Maryland too, because this Maryland team, they look really good. Of course, against Ohio State, obviously, like you guys said, talent just kind of won out in that game, but they did look good in the first half, and they made sure that they were able to stick with them for 3 quarters for the most part. Russ, you tell me, are we looking at a Maryland team that's probably going to go 9-3, 8-4, or do you think this Maryland team, maybe Ohio State showed some weaknesses and they're going to kind of go downhill?
I think you'll still see 8-4, 9-3. And that's actually, I think I had them at 9-3 before the season anyways. But they definitely exposed some things for sure, especially in that second half. But Maryland is, they're all kind of like on that second level in the Big Ten. I don't agree necessarily that they're the clear-cut fourth best team in the Big Ten, like a lot of people are saying, but they're a top half team, and I think they did deserve to be ranked maybe going into this week, and they showed that in the first half, but they just aren't quite there on the level of, the Ohio States, Penn States, or Michigans.
Definitely deserve to be ranked over Kentucky. I think that's for sure, especially the way they played against Georgia. Alec, what do you think? 9-3, 8-4, worse? What are your thoughts?
I mean, yeah, I think that's a fair prediction. I agree. Especially, I don't know what the heck Miami is doing being ranked, but that's a conversation for another day. I'm looking at their schedule right now. They got Illinois next week, and then they have a bye, and then they face Northwestern. I think they'll handily win both of those games. Then the big test comes against Penn State. So that's going to be a really big game, November 4th. I really think they can, other than Penn State, I really think 9-3 is a good ceiling for them. Like you guys were saying, I just don't think they have the talent just yet to get over the hump of Penn State and Michigan, which is such as life when you're in the Big Ten East, although that's going away pretty soon, thankfully, as a Rutgers fan as well, thank goodness. But yeah, I think 9-3 is a good ceiling for them. I think they have a clear advantage in pretty much all except for for those 2 games being against Penn State and Michigan. I think 9-3 would be good. And then if they get into a bowl game and face, say, like a Big 12 team that they can beat off of their own talent. 10-3. I think that's a really good year for Mike Locksley.
Yeah, I think so too. And we had Jordan Monk on from the Turtleheads podcast to preview the game with Chris Wilds, and he made a good point. Locksley has improved one win each year he's been there, and so 9-3 would continue that trend of doing that. Now, I don't know if they get to 10-2 the year after that, but that's a really good trend and really inspiring for the fan base. So, all right, let's move on to Purdue versus Iowa. Purdue scores 14, Iowa scores 20. Deacon Hill did not complete a single pass to a receiver. Iowa's O-line looked far better than they looked all season long. I don't know what this Iowa team is. It's really, really strange. Purdue, Hudson Card was just back there, and he just seemed like he was running for his life most of the game. They had good offensive success when he wasn't running for his life, but it was a really weird game, and Iowa came out on top. Russ, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting you say when he wasn't running for his life, because that's one of the common comments that's made within our pod's thread is if we could just protect Card, he could be a very good quarterback. But this game, obviously it's frustrating to do within a one-score game and be on the losing end of that, especially when we win pretty much every major statistic. First downs, we beat them 21-12. Third down percentage, we converted 9 of 19. They were 3 of 13. That's usually been a indicator of whether we're going to win a game or lose a game so far this year, and that wasn't so. Total yards 343 to 291, passing yards 247 to 110, and rushing yards, they obviously got us there. But if you take away the kind of shot out of cannon 67-yard run, it's 96 to 114. So you're kind of in the same ballpark. But Caleb Johnson, basically that was the difference in the game, really, that 67-yard touchdown. If he doesn't get that, we're looking at obviously a much closer game. And, on the scoreboard, if you take off 7 points, that means we win by a point. But, Card's a warrior. He has to wonder, though, if he can get any help from the officials. We were actually commenting on a couple of the shots that were late, one that was out of bounds that the commentators were like, hey, that probably should have been a late hit. He had the throwaway where he's like basically horizontal, throwing it away, and he gets it off, but they call him down by contact. And upon review, you can see that he wasn't down by contact, but then they come back after commercial and say, oh, you can't actually review that. And that takes us out of field goal range. So there were a few calls like that it could have extended a drive. And in a game like that's that close, that Iowa just likes to shorten the game by running the ball and keep the clock moving and lower the number of possessions. Those calls are very critical and huge. But, as a Purdue fan, I'm still on the optimistic side of things. I had us as 8-4 before the season, and this was a loss. So this was kind of a game where I would have liked to have it, but I didn't see us winning it necessarily going into the season. The other thing about Card is, a lot of people have talked about Card being the veteran guy, but Altmaier or somebody else in the West is kind of the up and comer and maybe the good quarterback that could develop. Well, Card's got 2 more years after this year as well. And he only started 5 or 6 games coming into the season. So as good as he's looked, he's got room to develop. And if we can protect him going into, the next year or two, I think our offense could be that much better and actually run efficiently, being able to protect him. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think Card is a better quarterback than people give him credit for. I think he's probably the best quarterback in the West. I think Altmaier could be there if he had a better offensive line, but I think Card, I really, really like Card, and I think he's a good player. Quick note before we get to Alec, I did think about the Bryce Young play last year when he was in the end zone throwing the ball away, when Hudson Card was throwing the ball away during that play, because of course they give it to Bryce Young, the former Heisman winner, but then when it comes to Hudson Card, it's like, oh no way, he was down by contact. I looked at that and I thought to myself, we have to find some consistency here. I think those were either SEC or Big 12 refs in that game, and then we have Big 10 refs here. And I was astounded by that as well. I don't know if it would have made a huge difference in the game, but like you said, limiting possessions, it could have made a big difference. So, Alec, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, it is really tough to see Purdue lose that game. A lot of advantages they had, like Russ was saying, they had some advantages in yards. You take away the long run by Caleb Johnson. But unfortunately, just some of the things like sacks and turnovers just couldn't get there. And that's one of the things that Kirk Ferentz lives on, getting those turnovers and big plays on defense. And I do find it really funny that, Iowa just cannot complete a pass to a wide receiver. They just didn't do it all game. That's just absolutely wild to me.
Yeah.
But, first game without, Cade McNamara. It didn't go too bad. Obviously, you want to see a little bit more than 110 yards on 6 completions. But if you're Iowa, you're moving forward. You're 5-1 now, so things are obviously looking up. You just got to keep moving forward. And if you're Purdue, yeah, it's not a great loss, but I feel like you just got to move on from here. I mean, you got really tough game up ahead against Ohio State. Not sure how that one's going to go, but there are some wins in this schedule. You got Nebraska. That's going to be a toss-up game off the bye, I think. And then you got Michigan and then Minnesota and then Northwestern and Indiana. I think they could squeeze out 3-4 more wins maybe if I'm looking at the schedule right now. So just got to keep moving forward. And Card has definitely shown some flashes in his time at Purdue. But like Russ said, you just got to be able to protect him because 6 sacks, that's not going to do it. But he did look good when he had protection. So definitely some optimism even in a close loss. You just got to keep moving forward. And especially since it just feels like a little bit of a transition year. But I think they'll get better from here.
I think so too, and I think they have the right guy too. I saw some Purdue fans on Twitter questioning Ryan Walters a couple weeks ago, and I get it. New coach, you'd like to see kind of that but man, from an outsider looking in, I look at Ryan Walters and I say, man, if I was Purdue, I would be really, really happy with having Ryan Walters. He seems like a good coach. He seems like he's cool, and he's going to be able to make the decisions that need to be made. And he brought in Hudson Card to kind of transition them into where they are. I mean, not every first-time coach could bring in a guy like that. I mean, he was a top 10 quarterback in the transfer portal to bring him in and make that happen. So, I do think it's better than maybe some Purdue fans I've seen give it credit for. I do want to ask you guys, because I heard somebody ask me this the other day after the game. They asked this morning. They asked me. They said, "What would Iowa be with like a 60th or 50th offense? Like just a barely above average offense? What would they be?" I mean, because they're probably going to go 10-2, 9-3 this year, maybe even 11-1. They could. I mean, you guys tell me, would this team be looking at being a top 3, top 4 team in the Big Ten, maybe even a top 2 team if they just had an above average offense?
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think of some of the years that Alabama maybe didn't have the big name offensive pieces. But they had the dominant defense like that. That's how good it could be for Iowa if they could just have a halfway decent offense. That their defense always seems to be like one of the top 10 in the country and one of the top 2 or 3 in our conference. But their offense, I mean, like you said, they couldn't complete a pass to a wide receiver. I mean, this is in today's football. Like you can't, if you can't do that, I mean, I know it's Big Ten football, but times are changing. We got 4 teams out west that aren't playing that style of football. That I don't know that that's going to work. So.
I love the stark difference of you have Iowa who can't complete a pass to a wide receiver and wins the game still somehow. And then you have Ohio State who has had 3 wide receivers drafted in the first round. It's like if they just shared a little bit, Iowa could really help the Big Ten. But it's interesting to me. Never change, Iowa. We love your Big Ten brand of ball. So, all right, Alec, let's get into your game. Rutgers at Wisconsin. Wisconsin wins this one 24-13. It was kind of getting a little bit out of hand there, but then Rutgers was coming back with a drive late in the first half. Of course, that 95-yard interception return for a touchdown was heartbreaking. You just feel like I was watching that game a little bit because I was on the Ohio State game on, but you just feel like kind of the energy out of the team just like dropped in that moment. I felt really bad for Rutgers there. Alec, what were your thoughts on the game?
Yeah, I mean, you had it right there. That entire game flipped on its head after the pick six at the end of the first half. It was not a good play call. It was not a good decision, and it was really not a good throw by Gavin Wimsatt. He just can't make that throw. Rutgers ran pretty much that exact same play against Virginia Tech a couple weeks ago and got a touchdown to Christian Dremel. Same route, concept, same target, different result. Yeah, the game really flipped on its head because let's say that ball falls incomplete. At best, you're getting another touchdown, so you're making it, let's see, it was, 7? I think it was like 10-0 at that point. You're making it 10-7 going into the half, and you get the ball. So you can maybe put on some more points there, at the very least get a field goal or something like that. Then, yeah, you're right back into the game. Or, even if they can't get a touchdown at that drive at the end of the first half, you're still 10-3, close ball game. Again, you get the ball out of the half. But that just, that pick six really felt like the game was over right then and there. And they did a good job of fighting to get back into the game in the second half, putting together 2 touchdown drives. I was very happy with that last one, especially even if the game was a little bit out of reach, like you said at that point. But Yeah, that pick six really just flipped the whole game on its head. The defense played well enough to win once again. They really got a lot of pressure on Tanner Mordecai. I thought the secondary did a pretty good job playing against that different kind of air raid spread type offense that Phil Longo loves to run. Pretty much the exact opposite of whatever Iowa attempts to do on offense. Braylon Allen was good. He was good, but I felt like he wasn't a game breaker. He had that touchdown in the first half, but other than that, felt like he was just kind of not like I said, not really breaking the game wide open. So the defense played really well, but the offense was definitely a pretty big concern. Gavin was missing a lot of throws, just sailing a bunch of, even some open guys, he just sailed the ball. So that's got to get fixed up. Also, the offensive line struggled. The run game struggled again. Second time in Big Ten play that's happened. So they got to get that going. But thankfully, they go up against an easier opponent in Michigan State this week. Definitely not as good on defense, and their offense are going through a quarterback change right now, I think. They haven't officially announced it yet, but it seems like the tea leaves is saying that Noah Kim's going to get benched, and then Caton Hauser is going to come in. And homecoming weekend, and I mean, the environment is all there for Rutgers to stomp Michigan State. I don't know if they will, but the environment's all there, and this doesn't really have anything to do with football, but it's a big weekend in New Brunswick next weekend, because last night it came out that a little recruit by the name of Dylan Harper from the basketball side will be taking his official visit next weekend to Rutgers. So he's going to be joining the entire 24 recruiting class that's already committed, them being fellow 5-star Ace Bailey, and then 4 stars Bryce Dortch, Lathan Somerville, and then 3-star Dylan Grant, as well as 2025 5-star recruit Shea McKinney. So it's a big weekend. So Rutgers has really got to show up, adjust to some things that went wrong. And yeah, the environment's got to be there, and I think it will be for homecoming, because homecoming is always a great place place to be on campus for football. So they really got to get it going, and I think they will this weekend.
Yeah, that's huge for Rutgers. I know the basketball program's really elevating, kind of leading that football program to elevate as well. So that's huge for them. Russ, what were your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, thanks. Purdue fans are going through pain in football, and then you got to bring up Rutgers basketball and remind us of some of that history with Purdue basketball.
You got Zach
so
Edey.
Appreciate that.
You got Zach Edey back. You're fine. We all wish we could have Zach Edey on our team, Russ.
That's true. But we'll never forget that Harper shot. I mean, that's, we won't forget it for sure. Yep. But I wrote down a couple records. Rutgers is 1-5 against the West in the last 2 years, and Maryland is 2-4. So I know Rutgers and Maryland are those teams that are like, man, I'm so glad when the divisions go away, and I'm so glad when we don't have to keep playing the big three. And, I do think that they're right there with some of those programs in the West. As you saw at the end of this game, I think it's like that Purdue-Iowa game where you feel like the game's not that close, and you look at the end of the game at the score and you go, man, if one or two plays went a different direction, we could have been in a different spot. But, I think that Wisconsin itself, they'll go as far as Braylon Allen can take them. I don't think Mordecai is the world beater is hyped up to be coming into the season. He's serviceable. I think he does definitely add something people didn't expect with his legs. He's definitely been more formal there, but he's not a world beater passer. I do think that they're still probably the front runner in the West. Iowa's probably gonna have something to say about that, but Rutgers, I think they're on the way up, kind of like Maryland too, maybe a step behind them. But this new realignment will give them a chance to really see where their program can go for sure. Like you mentioned, Michigan State's a good remedy for coming off this loss. IU after that as well, to get ready for that Ohio State, Iowa, Penn State, Maryland finish, where that's really going to decide, is this a 6-win Rutgers team or is this an 8-win Rutgers team? So yeah.
I'm excited to see Rutgers in a bowl game. If they can take care of business against Michigan State and Indiana, which, like you said, Alec, they should be able to take care of business against those two teams. We're looking at a Rutgers bowl game team, which is interesting to me, and I'm excited to see them go out of the conference and play another team. You did beat, Temple and Virginia Tech and Wagner in the out of conference, so that's really cool. But to see them one more game out of conference, I think would be really interesting. Another note on Tanner Mordecai is I feel like he should be like and I'm not trying to be disrespectful when I say this. It popped into my mind when I was watching him the other day. He should be kind of like an off-brand version of Drake May, right? He kind of has the running ability. He kind of has some of the same throwing. I don't really know how to describe it. He kind of throws the ball similar to how Drake May does. So ideally, he should be a good fit for Phil Longo. But then I watch the games and I think to myself, I don't know if he's the best fit possible. Braylon Allen seems like a perfect fit for what Phil Longo likes to do. And it looked like things were really bad with Ches Malusi gone. But now Jackson Aker has come in and he's basically doing what Ches Malusi was doing to a certain extent, at least production wise. And it's really interesting to me to see Tanner Mordecai just not really fit into this offense the way that I thought he might. And again, that's not really a knock on him. I'm not trying to say he's bad or anything like that, but he's just not fitting the way that I thought he might. And it kind of seems to be a hiccup in this offense. So we'll see how it goes from there. But all right, we got another game to talk about. Before we do that, we want to remind you, please do like and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're listening on podcast, please do follow us there and give us a rating as well. We appreciate that. We appreciate your feedback, and it does help spread the podcast and let people know more about us. All right, our next game is Michigan at Minnesota. Michigan manhandles Minnesota 52-10. Michigan is 6-0, one of the top teams in the country, currently ranked number 2. Minnesota is 3-3, just kind of struggling a little bit. They lost to Northwestern. This game against Michigan, really getting blown out here for Michigan's biggest win of the season, doesn't seem promising. Russ, what were your thoughts with this one?
Yeah, so this is some of that evidence that I think you were talking about earlier as an Ohio State fan that feels like maybe they don't have the guns to stand with Michigan this year. But, they just continue to dominate. They look like the best team in the country. I put them at number 1 this week in my top 25 for the first time. And it's even more impressive that no one player had to do too much to even look at that 52-10 score. You look at that score and you think, okay, someone in the box score is going to have 3 touchdowns, 150 yards, something crazy. Maybe JJ McCarthy had a huge day throwing the ball, but no, McCarthy didn't even hit 250 passing yards. Corum only had 9 carries for 69 yards. 2 pick sixes on defense obviously do a lot to take the ease off your offense, but this is more that evidence, for you Purdue fans that are worried and think the sky's falling, that the West does not look that impressive. Michigan beat them like they were playing Central Michigan, so Michigan definitely looks like the best team in the country and would worry me as an Ohio State fan or even a Penn State fan, or even a Georgia fan. Until this last week, I don't think Georgia fans were too confident about their chances. So,
Yeah, they look really good, and I'm right there with you, Russ. I hate to do it, but I put them number 1 too. If I'm just being objective and being honest, I tweeted out during that game, I said, Michigan's going to win the national championship. And I'm not trying to jinx them, but they legitimately look like the team who's going to win the national championship. It is, and I know they haven't played anybody. That's what everybody says. And I'm not trying to turn into a Michigan defender here. I don't want to be the Michigan defender guy, believe me. But at a certain point, when you just manhandle everybody you play, even without your head coach for 3 games, and don't get me wrong, those 3 games were not excellent opponents, but they were not all terrible. UNLV is looking, serviceable right now. When you just completely manhandle every single team you play, I don't know if there's another team out there that can say that they have done that with every team that they played throughout. Oklahoma kind of has some of those final scores, but they even struggled against Iowa State a little bit in the first half. So, Alec, what were your thoughts with this one?
Yeah, I'm with you guys. They really just completely dominated this game. It feels like the boat's starting to sink a little bit. They've really struggled this season. Like you said, the loss to Northwestern was not good. Granted, this game was maybe a little bit more expected to be a loss for Minnesota. I thought they would at least keep up for a little bit, but it like Russ was saying, it didn't even look like in the box score either. It was just a workmanlike game that Michigan has done over and over and over again across really the past 3 seasons. They've been able to just dominate their opponents. And it's hard not to say they look like one of the best teams in the country. I didn't put them at number 1 just because I'm waiting to see them dominate a team that I guess I'm not expecting them to dominate. But I definitely thought about it this week. I decided to cause chaos in my my poll last week by putting Florida State and Washington at the top, and I'm still doing that this week just to cause some more chaos. But yeah, I think coming up next week, I think if they dominate once again, I think it would be hard not to put them in number one, or at least in the top two. I know they're playing Indiana, but Indiana has a tough defense. So if they can dominate once again, it'll be hard not to deny. It'll be hard to deny them a top spot. And yeah, as for Minnesota, I mean, the wheels are starting to fall off. The boat's starting to sink. Things are not looking good. This offense has struggled. Ethan Kaliakmanis has not looked good this year. So they're really going to have to get it together. Otherwise, things could get ugly in a hurry. And there's something that we have in our Rutgers circles. It's not really realistic, but it's like a fun conspiracy theory. You know, if PJ Fleck gets fired, Kirk Shiraka maybe gets a job somewhere else as a head coach or an offensive coordinator at an SEC job. You know, Dave Brock, our wide receivers coach, gets promoted to offensive coordinator. Maybe we could bring back PJ Fleck as a position coach, but that's just a fun little conspiracy that we can dream about. But for now, yeah, Minnesota really needs to get it together.
That was actually where I was going to go next. I was going to kind of get you guys' pulse. I had the Ski pod on a few weeks, about a month ago, I think actually, and I asked them up front. I said, "Are you guys happy with PJ Fleck? Do you think PJ Fleck, needs to be fired or on the hot seat or anything?" And they were adamant, no. Now he's never beaten Iowa, and I have his records here in front of me. I can read them, but I mean, Russ, just from an outside perspective looking in. If you're a Minnesota fan, are you happy with PJ Fleck? Are you concerned? Are you thinking maybe hot seat? Are you kind of in the middle there? What are your thoughts, Russ?
Well, I think they kind of made the comment too that it's not been great for Minnesota football before PJ Fleck, and I think that's what's bought him a little more time, a little more goodwill. But I think with the addition of these 4 West Coast teams, the rubber's gonna meet the road. If he starts turning in some 4-8 seasons, then I don't know how many of those he's going to be able to sustain. But yeah, I think he's got at least another year or two to get it turned around. And like Alex said, if that boat can't stop taking on water, then yeah, he's done. Yeah.
Interesting. So Alec, where are you at with it? You think that he is in trouble, or you think it's like, no, this guy has had 9 wins. He's had at least, 9-4, 9-4, 11-2. They hadn't had a 9-win season since 2013 when Glenn Mason was there. He was 10-3, and he's had 3 seasons with 9 or more wins since he's been there. Where are you at with it, Alec?
Yeah, I mean, as a fellow fan of a program that has not experienced a ton of long-term success until the current guy was there, it's hard to fault them. It's hard to fault Minnesota fans, and I know you mentioned the Ski Pod, having them on talking about it, to be like, this guy has really brought us to great heights. Why would we get rid of him when he's shown the capability to do that? But here is my thing. Without Kirk Shiraka, the offensive coordinator that's now at Rutgers, I've mentioned him before, obviously, but it hasn't been great. He spent that 1 year at Penn State and the team really struggled. Then they brought him back and they were back to being really good again. Mm-hmm. So I'm interested to see how this offense looks, because with Joe Rossi manning the defense, who's also a former Rutgers defensive coordinator, by the way, these teams love these two schools love to trade back and forth when it comes to football coaches. I'm holding out a little bit of hope if I'm a Minnesota fan to see how the offense progresses. I agree with Russ. I give them a year or two more, and if they continue to struggle like this, they're just going to have to be some really tough conversations. So I think we'll see how he fares without Kirk Shiraka running the offense, because they had some of their best success with him running the show on offense with Tanner Morgan and that dominant running game with Mo Ibrahim. So I'm willing to give it a year or two more, but if that offense can't get it around, then you might have to start looking somewhere else.
Yeah, and I do look at this new expanded Big Ten, and I look at Minnesota, and it's a hard distinction to make, because I look at teams like Purdue, Russ, and I say, I think Purdue is one of the teams that can survive in this new Big Ten, especially with where Ryan Walters is taking them. And if they can get good QB play like Hudson Card coming in there, I think that they will be able to do well in this new Big Ten. I'm not saying they're going to win it, year after year, but to be able to win games and to be above 500 and make bowl games, and then have that every other year, like last year where you guys made the Big Ten championship and moving up, where that kind of stuff happens. I don't know if I see that with Minnesota. Just the style of play and some of the decisions that PJ Fleck has kind of made in there, I don't know if I see it. I'm not trying to say that PJ Fleck is a bad coach. I'm not trying to say that he's done a poor job because he's obviously not. I just read off the numbers. But the style of play does concern me a little bit. Just kind of relying completely on a running back like they did Mo Ibrahim and kind of like they have done this year with Darius Taylor as well. So it's interesting to think about. We'll see what happens. I'm not against Minnesota. I hope Minnesota does well, but it is what it is. So, all right, moving on. Nebraska at Illinois. Nebraska won this game 20-17. Illinois, or 20-7. Sorry. Illinois only scored one touchdown in the game. Alec, what were your thoughts on this one?
Woo. Talk about ugly. I mean, this is kind of like I guess, national showing, unfortunately, on Friday night of just how ugly this Big Ten West is. I was not expecting too much out of Nebraska in year one of Matt Rule, but I was expecting a little bit more out of Brett Bielema in year, 3 or 4 at Illinois. Their offensive line is a disaster. The defense hasn't taken that next step that maybe some expected to, even after losing Ryan Walters and losing a bunch of guys to the NFL. Seems like they haven't really recovered from that. Luke Altmaier has been okay, but again, that offensive line is a complete disaster. Only had 21 yards rushing on 19 carries. That's just not going to get it done. So Illinois is in a rough spot. Nebraska, they're kind of where I expected them to be. In all honesty, I expected them to be around 5-7, maybe can get to 6-6, depending on how the schedule shakes out. So yeah, Illinois, they're 0-3 in the conference now. They really have to turn it around. And I mean, looking ahead, they're really in some kind of rough shape. After that game, especially only having one touchdown, they go to Maryland for a 3:30 kickoff. They may not fare so well in that game. Then they go Wisconsin, at Minnesota, Indiana, Iowa, Northwestern. So I see 3 or so more wins in that schedule, but I don't think that's what Illinois fans expected coming into this game. And then on the Nebraska side, I mean, Heinrich Haarberg is that's a quarterback name, all right. I mean, he led the team in passing and rushing. Just had some not a ton going on, but just had some drives where they just managed to get something going. And yeah, I'm very interested to see where these two teams go because, like I said before, it's kind of just like a showcase of how much of a disaster the Big Ten West is. This was not a pretty game. It was not a good game at all, but Nebraska managed to come out on top, and I think Matt Rule's first season, like I said, is going as expected, but Illinois' season is already taken a turn for the downwards. They're not looking good right now.
Yeah, it's a rough day in Illinois right now. Russ, what were your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, ugly game for sure. Outside of the kind of back-to-back Nebraska TDs where if you blinked and missed them, there was not a lot going on in this game, especially Illinois. 6 3-and-outs in that game. The first drive, I think it was, stuffed on 3rd and goal from the 1 and then 4th and goal from the 1. That kind of set the tone, it seemed like, for the game just not being that great. Altmaier does, continue to show some flashes of future potential. It's amazing that if you watch that game, there's no way you would have thought he had 289 yards passing. Like, I don't know how that game looks that putrid and he almost hits 300 yards passing. But that shows that, there is maybe some possible good things in his future. But yeah, just that, like Alex said, that was not a great display on Friday night for the Big Ten, especially the Big Ten West, which, it's our final year. It's kind of an opposite of the Pac-12's final year where they're looking great on the national stage. The Big Ten West has kind of shown their rear end a little bit.
The thing for me was the game started out somewhat promising. Illinois, very first drive, they went 14 plays down, down the field, 74 yards, and unfortunately they turned it over on downs. So, obviously you didn't get the score there, but it was still like, wow, okay, we had Illinois put a drive together here, maybe this game could get interesting. And then Nebraska, they put together 11 plays for 86 yards to go down and get a field goal. It's like, okay, we might have a game here. And then the drives after that, punt, like you said, the Nebraska touchdowns back to back, and then punt, touchdown, punt, missed field goal, punt, fumble, field goal, blocked punt, missed field goal, downs, fumble, punt, interception, fumble, downs, end of game. It's like the chaos, and some of those touchdowns were like one play, I think. Yeah, Nebraska, they had a one play, 25-yard touchdown. Illinois, they had 5 plays for 76 yards. Like, just a wild game. And I don't know, maybe I'm just a Big Ten West sicko, but I love games like this. I watch it and I just love it. I don't know what it is, and I the entire time I'm thinking in my head like this is the Big Ten. This is how you epitomize the Big Ten. I don't know. Maybe I'm a sicko. Who knows? All right, our last game, guys. Howard at Northwestern. I did not actually get an eye on this game at all. So if you guys did, props to you. But Howard 20, Northwestern 23. Howard is an FCS team, so that's kind of a good FCS team. I put the numbers out there; they're like top 10 in PFF overall, so they're not a bad bad FCS team in PFF, but still should be winning by more than 3 if you're a Big Ten program here. Russ, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, yet another unimpressive showing by the Big Ten West, right? Northwestern was 23.5-point favorites and barely hung on against a 500 FCS team. Yes, they were ranked quite well in PFF, but when Eastern Illinois, or I think it was Eastern Illinois or Eastern Michigan, could beat them by more than what Northwestern can as a Big Ten team, that's not great. Not great, Bob. But yeah, it was not. I watched the highlights. I didn't get an eye on the game live, but even in the highlights, it looked like Howard was basically in the same conference as Northwestern, the way they played them. Mm-hmm. And that's when that's an FCS team, like I said, that's coming in at 2-2. Not a great look. Not a great look.
Yeah, for sure. Alec, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, like you guys were saying, Howard's not a terrible FCS team, but they are still an FCS team. Like Rutgers last week, they played Wagner. Wagner's a bad FCS team, and Rutgers dominated them. As a Big Ten team, you just can't go toe-to-toe with these FCS teams. And I mean, I get that they were down Ben Bryant. They were down to Brendan Sullivan, who didn't look too bad. Especially filling in for a starter like that, didn't look too bad. The running game kind of got going. It was a game full of in my opinion. Like the passing game was the running game was The second half was, especially the fourth quarter, was not good at all. But they got off to a big enough lead in the first half that they were able to overcome it. But yeah, I mean, this is kind of just going to be the ups and downs of Northwestern season. In my opinion, they've looked really good and beating Minnesota, and they've looked really not good and almost losing to Howard. So yeah, from here, I think Northwestern really, I don't really know what to make of them, to be completely honest. They will probably get Ben Bryant back soon at some point. I haven't really seen an outlook about what he's looking like. Because, I mean, last week they go toe-to-toe at least for a half with Penn State. They beat Minnesota in overtime. It's just going to be a whole lot of They play Nebraska next week, so that's going to be another game where I'm really not expecting – or no, next week they're on a bye, excuse me. And then the week after that they go to Nebraska. So that's going to be a game that I am going to watch with hands over my head, just ugly football. But, I mean, honestly, if you're a Northwestern fan, I feel like you have to think that this year has gone – I don't think you have – unless you had a little bit too high of expectations for this Northwestern team, I think you would have to say this year has gone about to expectations. But, yeah, the Howard game was ugly, and I think it will get better from here. But for now, that was an ugly game. But I think they'll get Ben Bryant back and look a lot better because he's a solid quarterback. So they'll get him back, and I think they'll right the ship at least a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like Northwestern has exceeded expectations. I mean, they're 3-3. Obviously, this game did not exceed expectations, but they're 3-3. Many people were questioning if they'd get even more than 1 or 2 wins because people kind of gave them Howard and they said, "Oh, UTEP, they should be able to win that game." But we'll see from there. And now they beat Minnesota. They're 3-3, and I'm looking at it. I'm saying, yes, they struggled against Howard, but if you're a Northwestern fan, you kind of take it. Right? I mean, it's like we got 3 wins. We've competed in the Big Ten. So, yeah, I don't know. So, all right, guys, any final thoughts about just college football in general? Anything going on in college football that you want to comment on before we get out of here? I'm glad.
They released the schedules for the next 5 years for the Big
okay. Yeah.
Ten. I thought they did a really good job.
Yeah, I like the schedules. I feel like everybody kind of got a good disbursement of the bigger teams. You know, the Oregon, the Washington, USC, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State. I feel like nobody really got trampled with some really tough opponents there. So I liked that. And I'm going to be interested to see how it plays out with everybody kind of playing each other more and seeing what goes on there. Should be very interesting. Alec, were you happy with the draw for Rutgers?
Well, for 2024, at least, I was absolutely thrilled with the schedule, especially based on what it was like the last time the schedule was dropped, where the Big Ten basically said, all right, we will take the entirety of the Big Ten East. You get them. We're also giving you UCLA, and we'll take out Indiana because, screw you, you're Rutgers. But then this time around, at least in 2024, they managed to avoid Michigan State, Ohio State, and Penn State. I believe all of them are off the schedule for 2024.
Wow.
They do have to go to LA, and they do face, I believe, USC at home. But I mean, the schedule is there right now. They had in the non-conference they have Akron, then they travel down to Blacksburg to face Virginia Tech for the second half of the home and home, and then I think they still have one open spot. But if you're looking at the schedule right now, from what this Rutgers team has looked like and what their outlook can be in the future, there's a path to a bowl game already next year. Granted, you have to play the games on the field, obviously, but I think Rutgers fans everywhere were extremely happy just to get away from the disaster that was the 2024 schedule before Oregon and Washington joined the conference. And I'll just put this out there. I don't think these schedules are going to stick just because the chaos that's going on in the ACC or whatever the heck goes on in any other conference. But it's good to have the schedules locked in for 2024. I just don't think it'll last very long, but I'm happy to have something.
Yeah, for sure. Russ, were you happy with Purdue's draws?
Yeah, so I apologize for that lag there a minute ago, but I thought it was cool that they made sure that every 5 years you travel to every Big Ten opponent, and that was probably the biggest worry for traditionalists. That they're thinking about conference expansion and going, well, is it really a conference anymore if you aren't playing the teams that often? But you'll see some newer rivalries. I think hopefully Purdue can give Ohio State some run for their money this year because we play you all, including this year, for the next 5 years now. So. But we also looked out with getting Indiana, Illinois every year. So, I think it's a good spread. But like Alex said, they did this whole show on Big Ten Network about the schedule review and all these cool games that were going to happen, and that lasted like 2 weeks. So, I wouldn't guarantee that all these games are going to happen the way that they were announced. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of look at it and I'm like, okay, I'm glad that you went out to, what they go out to, like 2029 or something like that. I was like, but are we really thinking that Florida State and Clemson are just going to stay in that grant of rights in the ACC? Like, I'm not saying they're going to the Big Ten, but, that's obviously been a rumor out there, and that grant of rights is not exactly what they want to be connected to. So it'll be interesting. Did you get not Rutgers, did you get Indiana and Illinois as rivals, Russ?
Yes, we did. Yeah, I guess because they're both trophy games, they protected those. So, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a pretty good draw. Yeah. And Iowa, I think, is the only one that has 3 rivals. So, yeah. Who was your rival, Alec?
Our rival is Maryland, just because the Big Ten is still trying to force that. You guys came in together, so you guys are going to be rivals now. Yeah. I guess they should figure out some kind of trophy for that game. There have been a lot of discussions between Rutgers and Maryland fans about what to do. Like, someone suggested maybe a crab trap just because, seafood, crabs are huge in Maryland, or maybe something from like I-95 or something, just because that's like the big connecting highway between New Jersey and Maryland. But there's a lot of really good suggestions out there. So hopefully the Big Ten takes one of them. And I do find it really funny that Penn State got like no protected rivals at all.
They've been here, 30 years now, and they've not made an enemy. So
Rutgers fans would disagree, but yeah.
I do like the idea of an I-95 trophy though. Like, just get like a golden highway, I guess, and like put it on it. I don't know. That's from my mind guess. So, all right. Well, hey, thanks so much, guys, for joining us. A little bit of a longer episode today, but I appreciate it. Thought we had a good time. Please remember, do go to Big Banter Sports, bigbantersports.com. It's our website, and you can find all of the podcasts there, including What's Choppin' and the Boiler Express and the Big Ten Huddle. We will see you again